can still picture the lace of that veil fluttering in the breeze off the chapel garden, soft as a whisper from the good Lord himself, but heavy as a ball and chain round your ankle on a foggy morning. It was a perfect June day back in 1998, the kind where the air hummed sweeter in a hymn with lilacs bloomin' wild and the promise of forever hangin' thick as clam chowder on a dockside stove. I was 39 then, standin' in the vestry of Old St. Mary's down in our sleepy coastal town of Seabrook, Maine, that speck on the map where the Atlantic kisses the pines and folks still say aïe instead of yes, and wave at strangers like they're kin. My fingers were shaken like a leaf in a nor'easter as I fiddled with the pearls at my throat, the very ones my mama wore on her wedding day, passed down like a family secret wrapped in tissue paper. At 64 now, those moments feel like echoes in a conch shell, darlin'. Distant waves crashin' faint but sharp enough to nick your heart if you hold them too close. My name's Clara Beaumont, and to most folks around these parts, I'm just the widow running that cozy little bookstore on Elm Street, shelves groaning under dog-eared romances and whodunits that dangle happy endings like carrots on a stick, the kind I used to swallow hook, line, and sinker. But tucked betwixt those pages are quieter truths, stories of a heart that got busted wide open once upon a time, scattering pieces like confetti at a hoedown I never asked to crash. Life's funny that way, full of plot twists that'd make even the best penny dreadful blush. Life in Seabrook's always been steady as she goes, like the tide rolling in with the summer crowd clammin' for lobster rolls slathered in butter and yarn spun over porch rockers, then easing out with the November fog that wraps the harbor tighter in a fisherman's knit. I'd pieced mine together careful-like after losing my first beau young to a trawler mishap that left the wharf weepin', pouring my days into wranglin' third-graders at the one-room schoolhouse, teaching 'em their ABCs and how to spot a lie in a tall tale. Evenings, I'd rustle up candlelit suppers with the gals, Margaret and her crew, laughin' loud enough to scare off the loneliness that'd sneak in like a gull stealin' fries from the boardwalk. And then, bless my stars, came Robert, with his salt-streaked hair tousled by the wind and hands calloused from hammerin' beams, the kind of fella who could fix more'n just the saggin' porch on my little saltbox cottage. He patched the empty spot I'd been haulin' round since I was knee-high to a lobster pot. We crossed paths at the farmer's market one crisp fall morn, him hagglin' over heirloom tomatoes like they were buried treasure, me blushin' fiercer'n a boiled lobster over a bunch of wild asters that matched his eyes. "Clara, darlin'," he'd drawl, voice rough as barnacles on a hull but warm as fresh-baked haddock. "You're the kind of woman a man don't build a life around. He builds a whole dang world." Our courtin' was simple as pie. A ring from his grandpappy's tackle box, shiny with age and promise, and vows whispered under the lighthouse at dawn, when the beam swept the waves like a forgiving eye. The wedding was going to be intimate as a clam bake, no fuss, just family and a smattering of souls who'd watched us stumble into love, like old Cap'n Ellis who spun yarns taller in the mizzenmast about mermaids courtin' sailors. I spent those last hours glowing like a lantern on a dark pier, hummin' Ave Maria soft under my breath, the looking-glass showing back a gal finally feelin' whole, like the jigsaw puzzle of my days had clicked into place at long last. But heck if secrets don't bob up like driftwood after a squall, don't they, folks? There was this one thing I kept buttoned up tighter in a clam at low tide, not even breathin' it to Margaret, my rock-solid best gal since we were pigtail brats skippin' rope by the cannery. A funny little knot of unease I'd chalked up to plain old bridal nerves. Like a snappin' turtle hidin' in the reeds, it'd sneak up on me during our quiet evenin's on the Widow's Walk, sippin' sarsaparilla and watchin' the ferries chug out to Monhegan, when Robert's gaze would drift off yonder, misty as the bay at dusk, like he was seeing something beyond the horizon I couldn't spy. Wasn't mistrust in him, no siree, just a soft rustle in the wind, hintin' at cracks under the calm waters, hairline fissures in the hull I'd patched over with hope and haddock suppers. Little did I reckon, that altar, dressed up pretty with white lilies noddin' like they knew better, would turn into the stage for a betrayal so raw and reel-to-reel it'd paint my whole world in grays duller'n a nor'easter sky, leaving me to wander those shades for a full quarter-century, picking at the scabs like a gull on a scrap heap. And then, out of the blue, years down the line when the salts had time to settle, a lone envelope slides through the mail slot, postmarked from a spot I'd scrubbed from my mind like barnacles off a dory. And bam, It cracks that gray wide to sunlight brighter in a lighthouse beam on a moonless night. The kind I never in a million years figured could chase away the chill. As I sit here now on my porch glider, the very one Robert sanded smooth as a baby's bottom for lazy afternoons watchin', the sloops tack against the breeze. The gulls wheel overhead, cryin' their lonesome calls like old regrets hollerin' for a harbor. The sea air carries that briny tang of salt and seaweed, mixin' with the faint whiff of bacon bread from Margaret's place next door, where she's likely kneadin' dough fierce as her opinions. I fold my hands in my lap, feelin' the faint ridge of that old engagement band I had melted down into a pendant years back. Hangs around my neck now like a locket holdin' both hurt and hallelujahs. Peace ain't about dodgin' the storms, I've come to figure. It's learnin' to two-step right through the downpour, skirts hiked and heart high. But back in those hush-hush hours 'fore the organ piped up, I was just a hopeful bride towing the line toward what I swore was forever, blind as a bat to the rogue wave fixing to swamp the deck. Folks around Seabrook still jaw about that day in hushed tones over coffee at the Anchor Diner, piecing it together like a quilt from scraps. But me, I keep it close, like a tide pool cradlin' secrets, lettin' the water smooth the edges over time. The porch boards creak under me soft, like they're whisperin', "Hold on, Clara." And I reckon they're right, 'cause even in the rockin', there's rhythm, and in the rhythm, a chance to sway toward shore. Out yonder, the bellbuoy clangs steady against the swell, a metronome for mended hearts, and as the sun dips low, paintin' the shingles gold, I let out a slow breath, tasting the salt of what was and the sweet of what's comin'. Ain't no use dwellin' on the undertow when the surface shimmers so. Life's too short for sinkin', darlin', when there's dancin' to be done. The chapel doors creaked open like an old lobster trap snappin' shut, letting in that June sunlight spillin' across the pews in bars brighter'n a fresh-caught cod, and I remember the hush droppin' soft as fog on the harbor, the rustle of them fancy programs whisperin' like dry leaves skitterin' on the cobblestones outside. My daddy, arm hooked firm in mine like he was anchorin' a dory in choppy seas, gave a gentle squeeze. His aftershave, Old Spice, same as always, mixin' faint with the beeswax polish on the oak benches. We stepped slow down that aisle, strewn with daisies I'd picked myself that very mornin' from the back meadow, their sunny faces bobbin' like they were in on the secret joy bubblin' in my chest. Robert stood tall at the altar, sure as a lighthouse in a gale, decked out in his navy suit that hung just right on his broad shoulders, his eyes lockin' onto mine with that lopsided grin that always turned my knees to jelly and my worries to water. The organ swelled up then, pumpin' out Canon in D like a heartbeat echoing through the stained glass glow, reds and blues dancing on the floor like confetti from a clam bake. I floated down that runner feeling lighter'n a gull on an updraft, my veil brushing soft against my shoulders like a lover's sigh, the bouquet of cream roses heavy in my sweaty palms, thorns pricking just enough to remind me this was real, my real hard-won forever. Whispers rippled gentle from the seats. "Ain't she radiant as a sunrise?" From Aunt Edith in the third row, fanning herself with her program. A soft hitch of a sob from Margaret up front, my maid of honor dabbing her eyes with that lace hanky she'd crocheted herself, muttering "bless her heart" under her breath. I was maybe 5 steps from him now, heart thumping wilder'n waves crashing on the jetty rocks at high tide, the air thick with incense and that faint, salty tang blowing in from the open side doors, when Robert turned, not toward me with arms open wide, but off to the side like a hound catching scent on the wind. And there she was, slinking in through that side portal like a shadow slithering off the deep. Victoria Lang, all dolled up in a crimson dress that slashed through the white lilies like a fresh-painted buoy, her hair pinned up in them elegant waves that screamed city fancy against our down-home charm. Eyes sharp and green as sea glass washed up after a storm. He took a step her way, not mine, and the whole chapel seemed to suck in a breath sharp as a nor'easter's bite, the air going thick enough to chew. "Robert?" My voice came out small and cracked, like a gull's cry lost in the fog. The bouquet slipping from my numb fingers to tumble petals every which way on the runner, white flecks looking for all the world like fresh snow on a summer green. The priest up there faltered mid-breath, his Bible flapping open and hands gone slack, face palin' whiter'n a boiled potato, while the guests froze up solid in their seats, aunties clutching pearls, uncles shifting uneasy, and Aunt Edith's hand flying to her throat like she'd swallowed a fishbone whole. Margaret half rose from her spot, her bouquet crumplin' in her fist, eyes wide as saucers and face drainin' to milk pail, mouth openin' but no words tumblin' out. Victoria reached him first, her gloved paw landin' light on his arm like she owned the territory. Lips curvin' in a smile that didn't climb higher in her chin, cool and calculatin', like a fox eyeing the henhouse at dusk. "I'm sorry, Clara, darlin'," Robert mumbled, eyes dodgin' mine like I was the sun burnin' too bright, his words spillin' out clumsy as spilled chowder on a diner's formica. "It's gotta be her. It always was, truth be told. I've been foolin' myself thinkin' otherwise." That betrayal didn't hit like a holler or a haymaker. Nah. It unraveled quiet and cruel, like the zipper on my gown suddenly cinchin' too tight round my ribs, the veil droppin' heavy as a wet sail, the ring on my finger turning ice cold and bitin' into my skin. Victoria's perfume sliced right through the churchy incense. Jasmine. Heavy and cloying like overripe fruit gone bad. As she leaned in close, whispering something low that made his head nod jerky, and then they pivoted together, back straight to me like I'd been a mirage all along, strolling out that side door into the hazy afternoon light, leaving the echo of their footsteps on the stone path fading slower in my breathin'. I stood rooted there, altar bare as a stripped wharf after a hurricane, the organ trailin' off to a pitiful whine like a fiddle string snapped mid-reel, the ride back to the cottage blurred by in a haze of hot salt tears stingin'. My eyes and Daddy's knuckles white-knucklin', the steering wheel of his old Ford pickup. Not a word passin' twixt us but the engine's low growl and the tires hummin' sad on the blacktop. That little saltbox house loomed up like a stranger wearin' a familiar face, climbin' roses tangled round the porch posts, mockin' the love I'd tangled my hopes in. I remember clawin' at that gown in the bedroom, lace rippin' under my frantic nails like it was fightin' to stay on, the full-length mirror in the corner throwing back a mess of a woman, curls all askew like a gull's nest after a blow, mascara runnin' black tracks down my cheeks, a bride come undone faster'n a poorly tied bowline. Mama's pearls clattered into the vanity drawer one by one, each plink a nail in the coffin of my dreams, and I sank down to the hooked rug, knees tucked to my chest tight as a fiddle case, the wool scratchin' rough against my stockin' feet. Margaret banged on the door like Judgment Day, bustin' in with arms loaded down with Chinese takeout from the harbor joint, and a fire in her eyes hotter'n a lobster boil. "That low-down snake and his two-bit harlot. I'll put the whammy on 'em both, see if I don't," she hollered, slamming the cartons on the sideboard. But I could only curl in tighter, the hurt throbbin' hot and empty in my gut like a gutted fish floppin' on the dock. Nights melted together after that, a foggy stretch of dark, the bed sprawlin' vast and unyieldin' as the Atlantic, sheets twistin' up from nightmares of white dresses bleedin' red onto chapel floors, the mantel clock tick-tick-tickin' like fingers waggin' blame. I'd run my thumb over the pale groove on my ring finger where the band had sat, skin tender and raw like a blister from ill-fitting clogs, wonderin' how in tarnation love could sour so quick, leavin' a taste bitter as quinine on my tongue, sharp as glass shards I'd near swallowed whole. Greed? Shoot, this wasn't about silver or land. It cut deeper in that. A straight-up heist of my whole self, Victoria swooping in to claim not just my groom, but the roadmap of tomorrows I'd sketched out careful, stitch by hopeful stitch, over suppers of pan-fried scrod and porch swings at sunset. I'd catch snatches of her perfume on gals passin' by on Main Street, flinch hard at crimson frocks hangin' in the dry goods window like warnings, them sensory spooks doggin' my heels every turn. One lonesome evenin', couple weeks down the line when the hurt sat heavy as a nor'easter brew, I hauled that veil out to the backyard fire pit, the one Robert had dug for marshmallow roast that never happened, and touched a match to it, watching the lace curl and blacken with a spiteful hiss, smoke stinging my peepers fierce as I muttered to the flames, "Let it go, Clara, you hear? Burn it clean." But the gray ash stuck to my palms stubborn, gritty as regret, and the wind whipped it round my ankles like it wasn't done with me yet. Robert's note showed up a few days on, forwarded from the church office on butcher paper stained with coffee rings. "Forgive me if you can, Clara. It weren't never about you being less. But mercy? It stuck in my craw like a fishbone, prickin' with every heave of my chest. I remember the click-click of her high-heel shoes striking away down that gravel path, fadin' into the hush like a dirge for my halted dreams, leaving me stranded in the chapel's cool echo, wonderin' if I'd ever hear music sweet again. That wound didn't heal pretty. It festered low and sneaky. A purpled bruise bloomin' slow under the finest silk, turnin' everyday delights to dust. The merry peal of weddin' bells from the harbor chapel twistin' my innards like a gut hook. A young couple's giggles driftin' on the pier piercin' sharper 'an a nor'easter gale. Victoria's face, poised and unbendin' as a figurehead on a clipper ship, haunted my own reflection in the steamy bathroom glass, her win a cruel mirror to my wipeout. Betrayal, darlin', ain't just the dirty deed. It's the slow drip venom of second guessin' it leaves behind, eatin' away at the gal you thought you knew till you're hollowed out like a gutted dory, whisperin' to the midnight shadows if you were ever truly enough to hold on to. Folks at the diner'd cluck over their crullers, piecin' the gossip like a jigsaw from the weekly rag, but I kept my chin up, smilin' brittle as saltine crackers, while inside the tide kept pullin', relentless and raw, and through it all, that empty ring finger itched phantom-like, a ghost reminder of the hand that slipped away, leaving me to paddle solo in waters deeper than I ever figured. The months right after that altar fiasco stretched out like taffy pulled too thin over a hot stove, snapping back now and then to whack me upside the head with a fresh wallop of hurt that left me reelin' like a dory caught in a riptide. Seabrook, with its picture postcard lanes lined with hydrangeas bloomin' blue as the bay and lobster buoys bobbin' cheery red and yellow on the swells, turned into a blamed maze of memories that jumped out at me from every foggy corner. The bakery on Wharf Street where Robert popped the question over blueberry muffins drippin' with butter. Now a spot I'd skirt quicker and a cat dodgin' a sprinkler. The lighthouse steps we'd clumb hand in hand at low tide, sharing kisses salty as the spray. Now a path I'd steer clear of come dusk when the beam swept round like a accusin' finger. I up and quit teachin' that very fall, the chalk dust from the blackboard choking me thicker 'n foghorn smoke, sticking in my throat like unshed sobs I couldn't cough loose, and took that job at the little bookstore on Elm instead. Figuring the shelves of yellowed paperbacks might make a kinda hidey hole where stories wrapped up neat with bows, even if my own yarn was frayed at the ends. Dusting them spines turned into my daily ritual, fingers tracing titles like Gone with the Wind or To Kill a Mockingbird, lingering on tales of gals picking up the pieces after the storm. But every ding of the old brass register bell still jolted me like a ghost paw tapping my shoulder, reminding me how quick a happy ever after could curdle sour. Bills started piling up quiet-like on the kitchen sideboard. Rent on that saltbox cottage with its squeaky floorboards and climbed roses, plus Mama's old medical tabs that bubbled up from the woodwork like clams at low tide. And I'd hunker down at the wobbly formica table under the pull-chain lamp, its yellow glow poolin' soft, countin' pennies from a mason jar till they rattled empty, stretchin' tea bags till they tasted more of paper than chamomile, skimpin' on the cream to make the jar last. Hopelessness snuck in sneaky with the evenin' fog rollin' off the water, whisperin' low in my ear that I'd peaked out at 39, just a dried-up old spinster in the makin'. My body a roadmap of miles nobody'd ever bother to travel, leaving me feelin' lower in a snail's belly on a wet sidewalk. Margaret, bless her stout heart. She was my anchor through the whole blow, stormin' the cottage every whip-stitch with a pot of clam chowder steamin' in Tupperware that smelled of sea and solace, and a glare fierce enough to stare down a hurricane. Clara Beaumont, you're finer 'n a fresh-caught bluefin. Don't let that pair of lowlifes rain on your parade and drown you out, she'd declare, plunking her ample self down at the table with a thud, her curls frizzin' wild in the briny air like she'd stuck her finger in a socket, unpackin' skeins of yarn and colors brighter 'n a cod's belly for the scarves we'd knit side by side, needles click-clackin' like secret codes spellin' out hang in there. Sugar. She'd hog-tie me into takin' walks up the widow's walk at sundown, arm looped tight in mine like we were schoolgirls again dodgin' the cannery boss, pointin' out the seals floppin' lazy on the black rocks below the bluff. See there? Even them fat lugs wallow through the muck and come up shiny as a new penny. You will too, mark my words. But her cheer bounced off my shadows some days like pebbles off a pier. One evening, after a nosy customer jawed about a lovely shindig at St. Mary's last weekend, I up and shattered a china teacup against the sink, shards glitterin' pretty as tears on the linoleum, and she just gathered me up fierce, rockin' me through the waterworks till my ribs ached, murmurin' soft as a lullaby, let it rip. Love. It's all fertilizer for the garden that's gonna grow come spring. Tension brewed in them quiet spells. Twixt her visits, worry etching deeper lines round her merry eyes. Our friendship straining a mite under the load of my unspoken dread. What if this was the whole kit and caboodle? Just me and the tide coming in and out forever? Survival meant scratching out small acts of rebellion to stake my claim, like slathering a fresh coat of robin's egg blue on the cottage trim, a color Victoria'd turn her nose up at quicker than a cat at a bath. Each brushstroke a tiny, "This here's mine," to the wind whipping off the waves. Daniel come along later, a surprise package from a chance meetin' at the library fundraiser with a kind widower named Paul, who smelled of pipe tobacco and had the patience of Job quoting his Emerson over mugs of Folgers. Our courtin' was slower 'n molasses runnin' uphill in January, built on comfy silences over checkers and shared sighs watching the ferries chug out to the islands. And when Daniel popped into the world 3 years after that altar mess, squallin' like a gale force howler with his daddy's nose and my stubborn chin, he was my walkin', talkin' redemption all bundled in a blanket monogrammed with seahorses. But even his gummy grins and chubby fists couldn't chase off the nights I'd rock him in the glider, staring holes in the ceiling beams scarred from salt air, the betrayal's echo bouncing back mean. "Will he up and leave you high and dry too, Clara?" Paul was steady as the tide itself, a history prof who spun yarns about ancient shipwrecks over flapjacks. But his going was sudden as a rogue wave, heart attack at 49, leaving me widowed at 47 with a toddler clinging to my skirt tails. Hopelessness doubled down then, heavy as a seine net full of regrets. Me scraping by on bookstore wages thinner 'n clam broth and odd jobs hemming curtains for the summer folks. The ocean's roar pounding relentless outside the window like it was mocking my lone wolf ways. Neighbors started clucking their tongues over picket fences and at the post office. Poor Clara. Jilted at the altar, then widowed quicker than you can say jackpot. What a rotten draw of the cards. Their pity stinging saltier than a scrape from a barnacle. And I'd paste on a smile brittle as a saltine cracker over garden club teas, weeding my asters with hands that shook like aspen leaves in a zephyr. Tension wound up tighter in a fisherman's line with each unanswered "what if" that popped up unbidden. What if I'd clocked the signs sooner, like them distant rumbles for a squall? What if Victoria's fancy shadow hadn't loomed so large over my plain old light? Daniel grew wise beyond his years, his little paw slipping into mine at Paul's graveside under the spruces, asking solemn as a parson, "Mama, why do hearts bust up like waves on the rocks?" I'd pull him close, his curls damp and smelling of baby shampoo against my cheek, mumbling half-baked truths about how some things mend with time and tide. But inside, the blue devils gnawed steady, eroding my edges like the sea chewing at the dunes. One bitter January, with snow blanket in the headlands thick as a eiderdown, and the wind howling lonesome through the eaves, I near about sold the cottage, hauling out boxes half-stuffed with faded snapshots and regrets, the real estate fella pacing the parlor with his clipboard. But Margaret busted through the door snow-dusted and mad as hops, her scarf trailing like a battle flag. "Over my cold, dead body, Clara. This here's your safe harbor. Storms blow through, but you don't jump ship." Her hollerin' held me steady, but the pull showed. Her own ticker actin' up from skippin' lunches to stretch her pension thin. Our bond fraying at the hems like well-worn oilskins after too many gales. Daniel turned into my North Star, his school plays where he'd ham it up as a pirate king pulling me through the slumps. His scraped knees from racin' bikes down the dunes demanding bandages and bedtime yarns that chased the shadows a spell. But comin' of age brought its own brambles. Teen years full of sulky silences that echoed my own walled-up hurts. His gentle probins bout his paw cuttin' close to the bone. "Did you love him fierce like you loved Daddy, Mama?" I'd nod quick, throat closin' up tighter in a knotted hawser, the altar's ghost rising to choke off my air like kelp round my ankles. Hopelessness crested high in them stole-away moments, gazing at the pendant I'd forged from that melted ring, wondering if gumption was just fancy talk for being too bullheaded to quit. The tussle carved me out hollower in a gutted haddock, yet I kept my feet under me, stocking the bookstore with dog-eared heroines who dusted off and danced again, whispering to the empty aisles betwixt customers. One chapter at a time. Clara, 1 page'll do. Margaret's belly laughs over chowder nights steamin' on the stove. Daniel's bear hugs after winning the science fair with his tidal pool diorama. They were my lifelines, threadbare but tough as braided rope. But the load bore down heavy, a squall buildin' out of sight over the horizon, till that envelope slid through the slot one blustery morn, threatening to swamp me for good or maybe, just maybe, tote me to calmer waters. It was a blustery October mornin', 25 years to the month since that altar left me high and dry like a beach dory at low tide, when the mail slot in the front door gave a clatter louder'n a gull fightin' over scraps. More'n just the usual seed catalogs and junk flyers from the mainland shops. Out tumbled a cream-colored envelope, thick as a fisherman's wallet after a good haul, postmarked crisp from Boston with a return address scrawled in elegant loops that hit me square in the gut. Victoria Lang Whitaker. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips, steam curlin' up lazy like question marks dancin' in the draft from the storm window, heart skippin' a beat wilder'n a jackrabbit dodgin' buckshot in the dunes. Seabrook's wind was kicking up a fuss outside, rattling the panes like it was trying to bust in on my quiet, leaves from the maples skittering across the porch like frantic thoughts I couldn't corral. I slit that thing open with the edge of my butter knife, the one with the whalebone handle Paul carved years back, the paper given way soft as old sails under a gentle breeze. Inside, a few sheets unfolded slow, her handwriting flowin' graceful as ever, like she'd penned it with a quill dipped in regret. But the words? Shoot, darlin', they cracked my world wide open again, fresh as a nor'easter slammin' the wharf. Dearest Clara, it kicked off, formal as a lighthouse keeper's log but tremblin' underneath. If these lines find you, then I've lost the scrap I never truly won. Pardon the long wait, yellow-bellied fear kept my trap shut. But the truth's hollerin' louder'n a foghorn now, and I reckon it's high time it rings out. Cancer. Stage 4, she laid bare. Diagnosed just months back, treatments floppin' like a hooked bluefish thrashin' on the deck, leaving her frailer in a shadow at high noon. The tone in that kitchen shifted quicker'n the tide turnin'. From my long gray veil of loss to a revelation sharp as dawn breakin' over the swells, pullin' me down deep, then bobbin' me back up, gaspin' for air sweeter'n salt spray on a clear day. She spilled the whole kit and caboodle then, ink runnin' where her tears must have blotted the page like rain on a chart. The fling with Robert, a whirlwind romance sparked from stolen glances at his buildin' site up on the bluff, where she volunteered her fancy pants hours for the Historical Society, catalogin' shipwrecks and such like she was queen of the deep. I spied the spark in him that you tended careful. Clara, the rock-steady kind of love and envy twisted me up selfish as a spoiled clam, hungerin' for what I couldn't bake myself. Shocker after shocker tumbled out. Robert's doubts, so deliberate by her honeyed whispers over coffee at the Anchor Diner, plantin' seeds of what-if till they rooted deep. A pregnancy scare that weren't real, hers, cooked up from whole cloth to reel him in like a mackerel on a lure, forcin' his hand quicker'n a squall hittin' the bay. They'd tied the knot hasty in a stuffy Boston courthouse, no lilies or lace, just a judge with a cough and a witness who smelled of cheap cigars. The honeymoon? A sorry excuse for paradise, riddled with spats fiercer'n catfights over the last lobster tail, her polished shine crackin' to show the rot gnawin' inside from the get-go. Divorce come barrelin' down swift as a rogue wave, Robert skedaddlin' west to California with ghosts nippin' at his boot heels, chasin' him clear to an early grave from the bottle and the what-ifs that drowned him slower in quicksand. Victoria's trail after? A string of empty chases, fancy galleries in Beantown slingin' seascapes to tourists, lovers who lit out quicker'n fireflies at dawn, and a little one lost too young to croup that still clawed at her in the quiet hours. I turned into the big bad in my own sorry tale, Clara, playin' the vixen while you played the hand life dealt with grace I could only envy from afar. Folks whisper about you still. The bookstore gal, mama to a fine boy, risin' like yeast in the heat, and it stings sweet, knowin' I couldn't touch that fire. The pages shook in my paws, the room tiltin' like the deck of the old ferry in a cross-chop, that long-held sadness giving way to a rush of whys and how-comes. Her raw hide a lookin' glass shatters my own long-held shell. Daniel found me hunkered there on the linoleum hours later, knees drawn up like I was riding out a blow, them pages scattered round me like wind-tossed kelp on the strand. Mama? What's got you lookin' like you seen the devil himself? His voice pulled me up gentle, them brown eyes of his, Paul's eyes, steady as a compass, scanning the script quick, face drainin' pale as clam broth when the twist sank its hooks in deep, the fancy dame who'd busted our world reaching out from her sickbed with not poison, but plain old human frailty. We hunkered down together right there on the floor, his big old paw restin' warm on my shoulder like Paul's used to during stormy nights, reading her words out slow so they could settle like silt after a dredge. Revelation wove through us thick as fog on the bay. Her final beg, a confession all notarized neat as a captain's log, unearthing how she'd funneled bucks anonymous-like into Daniel's college scholarship years back. A quiet sorry buried in estate papers nobody dug up till now. Tell your boy I'm grieved to my bones, for the pa he never got to know proper, for the ripples I kicked up that near drowned you both. The kitchen air lightened then, tone bloomin' from sorrow's briar patch to revelation's wild rose, secrets pouring out like tide pools drainin' at ebbing water, laying bare the fragile critters hidin' underneath, hurt and hunger, plain as the barnacles on a hull. Margaret rolled up by noon, Daniel having rung her on the rotary like a fire alarm, her gasp bouncing off the walls as she snatched them sheets. The gall of that she-devil, after all these dog years? But even her fire dimmed soft when she hit the tail end. That postscript dangling a key to a safety deposit box up in Portland, holding a bundle of letters from Robert, yellowed and unsent, begging mercy from the grave. That twist weren't no payback plot or pat-on-the-back vindication. It was just plain folks being frail as eggshells in a gale. Victoria's high society gloss crumbling to beach sand underfoot. Her penned pleas a rickety bridge slung across the chasm she'd gouged out with her schemin'. I couldn't square up to you back then, Clara, too tangled in my own sorry knots. But dyin' strips away the folderol like a stiff wind off Monhegan. You was always the tougher nut. Live that big for both our sakes, We piled into Daniel's old Subaru the next week for the haul to Boston. Him at the wheel hummin' sea shanties to keep the mood light, Margaret riding shotgun with a thermos of her chowder steamin' up the windows. Warmin' for the road, loves. Can't face the city on an empty tank. The highway unspoolin' blurry as we chewed over the whys and wherefores. Grief tanglin' with grace like nets full of flotsam. At her bedside in that stark hospital ward, smellin' of bleach and wilted flowers, Victoria lay frail as a wrung-out dish rag under them starched sheets. But her eyes, still sharp as a cod hook, locked onto mine steady, no crimson finery now. Just a plain gown and a hand stretched out trembling like a leaf in the offing. "Clara," she rasped, voice thin as smoke from a damp fire. "Thank the stars you came. I was dying that day, too. Deep down in the dark where nobody sees." Revelation crashed over us warm as a sunbreak through clouds, tone shifting to a cathartic glow that filled the room. The monitors beeping steady like reluctant heartbeats syncing up our ragged ones, hers fadin', mine finding a rhythm anew. We talked halting at first, words bumpin' like boats in a swell, her admittin' the envy that'd gnawed her hollow, me noddin' slow as the pieces clicked. The whispers, the lies, the life she'd snatched thinking it'd fill her own empty hold. Daniel squeezed my hand quiet from the doorway, Margaret dabbing her eyes with a tissue wad, and in that sterile hush, with the harbor fog pressing the window like an old friend, the air sweetened, secrets out, souls bared, the twist not endin' the hurt but easin' it, like hauling up anchor after a long voyage, lettin' the current carry you home. And as the sun slanted low through the blinds, gilding her face peaceful for the first time I reckoned she'd felt in years, I took that frail paw in mine, whispering back, "We're square now. Victoria, tide's turn for us all. It weren't easy, darlin'." But in that grip, revelation bloomed full, turning the poison of yesterday to the posy of tomorrow, one forgiven breath at a time. Healin' come at me in layers, darlin', like slatherin' varnish on a piece of driftwood you hauled off the beach, slow and careful, each coat soaking in deep to bring out the grain that had been hidin' under the salt and scars all along. Victoria's passin' was quiet as a whisperin' tide 2 weeks after that hospital heart-to-heart. No fanfare or folderol, just a small send-off in a Boston Chapel stuffier and a fisherman's sweater, the kind where the pews creak under your weight, and the stained glass throws colors like regret on the floor. We made the trek up there at her writin', me, Daniel at the wheel of his Subaru with the heater blastin' full tilt against the November nip, Margaret shotgun nursin' her thermos of chowder that steamed up the windows something fierce. Can't pay respects on an empty belly. Loves, it'll sour the soul. And we placed a single daisy from my backyard patch on her plain pine box. its petal noddin' soft like it understood the meadow we'd all lost that June day long ago. Justice didn't roll in with whoopin' sirens or a judge bangin' his gavel like thunder over the bay. Nah, it unfolded gentle in the truths that bubbled up from the muck, like clams spittin' after a low tide. That safety deposit box up in Portland? We cracked it open the next day, the bank fellow with his wire-rimmed specs and clipboard treatin' us like we'd unearthed Blackbeard's stash. Out spilled a bundle of Robert's letters, yellowed as old sails and unsent, his scrawl beggin' mercy from beyond the grave. Clara? Darlin', I was weaker in watered rum, not lovin' you less. Forgive this fool who chased shadows thinkin' they were sun. I read 'em out loud by the lighthouse at dawn, voice catchin' on the salt wind, tears mixin' with the mist till I couldn't tell one from the other. Then folded 'em careful and touched a match to 'em at sunset on the headland, watchin' the flames dance orange against the waves, ashes liftin' light as released gulls, carryin' his sorries out to sea where they belonged. No big courtroom drama or payback pie, but her consequences whispered through all the same. Victoria's leavin's, modest as a widow's mite from slingin' them seascapes in Beantown galleries, set up a scholarship fund right here in Seabrook for single mamas scrapin' by on dreams and dimes. Her name etched small and humble on the brass plaque down at the community hall. For second chances we all deserve. Ayo. It bankrolled Daniel's first teachin' gig overseas in England, haulin' him across the pond to spin yarns about ancient harbors to wide-eyed kids. A full circle of grace she never got to clap eyes on, but reckoned on all the same. Transformation snuck up on us, soft as fog liftin' at noon. Warm in the day like hearth fire cracklin' on a chill eve when the wind's howlin' off the rocks. I got to tinkerin' with the bookstore that winter, dustin' off the corners and addin' a snug nook for local scribblers to read their hearts out. Poets jowin'. 'Bout lost loves and captains spinnin' tales of ghost ships that still prowl the fog banks. Shelves groanin' heavier under books 'bout gals dustin' off after the blow and dancin' again. Stories that hit close to home now like a familiar shanty tune. Folks started pilin' in thicker'n tourists at peak season, lingerin' over the rockers by the front window with mugs of my weak tea, sharing their own busted dreams till the evenings stretched long and the bell over the door jingled merry. Margaret and me kicked off a walk-in crew for the widows and widowers round these parts, tying on our sensible shoes and trundling along the shore path where the rack line tells tales of what the sea tossed up overnight, her laughter ringin' freer'n a bell buoy in calm water now that the ghost wedged twixt us had faded to mist. You up and forgave the devil in silk, Clara. That's your secret sauce. Stronger'n any potion I ever brewed, she'd holler, linkin' her arm in mine fierce as we dodged tide pools shimmerin' like looking glasses, gulls wheelin' overhead like they approved of the mending. Daniel, my quiet sage with his nose always in a book thicker'n a whaler's log. He framed up one of Robert's old envelopes. Not the words that had cut deep, but the stamp postmarked from a California motel, faded blue as the bay. A little talisman of tying off loose ends, hanging it proud beside our family snapshots on the mantel. Edges curlin' soft like they were sighin' relief. His own life bloomed steady, too, hitchin' up with a sweet librarian named Ellie, who baked scones flaky as seafoam and quoted Dickinson over Sunday suppers. Their home a cozy nest up the coast where Daniel'd ramble 'bout Roman shipwrecks till the stars come out. Victoria's shade didn't loom no more like a squall on the horizon. It softened to a teacher, her confession act like a stiff breeze clearing the cobwebs, pushing me to pen my own letters, unsent, folded neat in that cedar box under the bed, to the wide-eyed gal standin' at the altar that day. You was enough all along, Clara. Don't you forget it, hear? The writin' of 'em eased the kink in my chest, like hauling up a snagged net full of regrets and findin' pearls instead of junk, and that pendant from my melted ring. I took to wearin' it daily now, cool silver nestlin' against my collarbone like a locket holdin' both the hurt and the hallelujahs. A quiet, I made it, with every breath. Redemption threaded through us easy as mendin' a tear in oilcloth, forgivin' the breaks without wipin' 'em clean, lettin' the scars stay as road maps for the gals comin' after. Seabrook took notice of the shift in me, the way I'd linger longer at the potlucks down at the Grange Hall, eyes sparkling brighter in lighthouse glass after a Polish, sharing snippets of my yarn with a depth that drew the folks round the foldin' tables closer, their nods warmin' as fresh cider on a crisp fall day. Margaret's health perked up with our routines. No more skippin' meals for her. Not with me dropping off loaves of no-need bread still warm from the oven and her quilts fetching top dollar at the charity sales in the bookstore window. Proceeds funneling straight to that scholarship fund like a steady current carrying good forward. Daniel's drop-ins from his teachin' posts brought armloads of tales from dusty archives in Athens, or rainy digs in York. Echoes of history's tough-as-nails women who'd weathered worse'n a jilting and come out swingin', and we'd hunker on the porch glider with tea steamin' in our mugs, reflectin' on paths that forked hard but looped back gentle in the end. The big ol' antagonist of time itself. Them 25 dog years of gnawin'. What-ifs that had kept me up nights staring at the ceiling fan whirrin' lazy, faced its reckoning quiet. Victoria's legacy bloomin' humble as beach peas in the sand, her comeuppance not a whippin' post, but a purpose carved from the pain, turning her poison ivy to posies that nodded in the breeze. I took to gardenin' more, coaxin' them daisies to riot along the front walk, their cheery faces turnin' sunward stubborn as a captain battlin' a blow. Thorns and all a reminder that beauty hunkers down through the howlin' and rises pretty as you please when the weather breaks. Warmth crept back into my bones slow as sap risin' in the maples. Showin' reflective in the sunsets we chased down the bluff with the walkin' gals. Strength hidin' in the straight-backed way I carried my basket of books to market. Dignity not in bein' flawless as a showroom china, but in stickin' to your guns through the gale, risin' each time the wave knocked you flat. Forgiveness weren't about forgetting the sting of that altar echo. Nah. It was tracing the hurt lines tender with time, turning 'em from gashes that bled to guides that glowed. Proof positive that even after the roughest squall, the harbor waits patient, arms open wide. And in them evenings now, with the bell buoy clangin' soft out in the bay like a lullaby for mended hearts, I'd catch myself hummin' Ave Maria again. Not sad, but grateful. The notes liftin' light on the salt air, carrying me forward on wings I'd forgot I had. Life's a harbor full of comin's and goin's, darlin'. But with grace like that, well, it's a voyage worth every knot in the rope. Today, as the sun hangs low over Seabrook's harbor like it's fixing to dip a toe in the drink, paintin' them waves in lazy strokes of rose and gold that shimmer sweeter in a fresh batch of strawberry rhubarb pie coolin' on the sill, I settle into that old porch glider with a mug of chamomile steamin' gentle in my lap. The same brew Margaret swears by for soothin' what ails ya. And she oughta know, having nursed more scraped knees and broken hearts than a harbor dock on a busy morn. The glider creaks soft under me, like it's sighing content after all these years of holdin' my weight through the blows, and I let my eyes wander out to where the bell buoy clangs its lonesome rhythm against the swell, a steady heartbeat for the bay that never quits, even when the gales howl fiercest. Daniel rang up just this mornin' from his latest teachin' post over in Greece, voice crackling down the line like static off a shortwave radio, full of whoops and hollers bout unearthin' some ancient amphora shards that whisper secrets of sailors long gone to Davy Jones's locker. "Mama, you gotta see these. Cracked but beautiful. Holdin' stories we ain't even dreamed of yet," he says. And I chuckle low, tracing the pendant at my throat with a fingertip worn smooth from years of worryin' it like a rosary bead. That little silver keepsake, melted down from the ring that once promised the moon, feels cool against my skin now, not burnin' like it used to. A quiet, I made it through hanging there, holding both the stings and the salvations in its curve. Victoria's letter? It don't molder away in some dusty drawer no more, gathering cobwebs like a forgotten trawl net. Nah, it's tucked safe in that cedar box under the bed, right twixt Mama's pearls and Paul's old pipe. Not a hauntin' specter, but a seed that's taken root deep, sproutin' something tender and unexpected. A reminder that even the prickliest thorns can coax out roses if you give 'em time. Sun, and a little grace. Life's altars ain't always carved from cold stone with vows echoing off high ceilings, darlin'. Sometimes they're just the everyday thresholds we tow across solo. Hearts stitched back with threads tougher than fisherman's twine. Steppin' from the hurt into the hazy light of what comes next. Betrayal might bust the vessel wide as a hull breach in a squall, sending dreams splashing overboard like so much chum to the sharks. But it can't douse that deep-down thirst in your spirit for pulling yourself whole again. Nay, it fans it fiercer like bellows on a forge turning embers to blaze. I've come to see, rockin' here with the salt breeze rumplin' my apron and the gulls wheelin' lazy overhead like they're gossipin' about old times, that forgiveness is the truest promise we make. Not to the fella at the end of the aisle or the gal in the crimson frock, but to the gal staring back from the lookin'. Glass after the dust settles. The one with laugh lines etched deep from force in. smiles through the fog and eyes that have learned to spot the lighthouse beam even on the blackest night. It binds us not in irons that chafe and chain, but in that soft glow of becomin', where the what-ifs fade to footnotes, and the road ahead unrolls crooked but kind, inviting you to wander it with your head high and your basket full of second chances. Margaret drops by most afternoons now, her sensible clodhoppers clomping up the walk with a basket slung over her arm, brimmin' with whatever the garden's given. Up. Zucchini big as baseball bats, or berries stained purple as a bruise that don't hurt no more. "Clara, you old saltbox, you're glowin' like a lantern at the capstan," she'll tease, plopping down beside me with a thud that sets the glider swayin', her curls frizzed wild from the mist as she unpacks her latest yarn haul, needles already clicking away at another Afghan for the church bazaar. We'd jaw the afternoon away about nothin' and everythin', how the new crop of summer folk are thicker'n tourists at a clam bake, arguing over the best bait for stripers, or how her grandniece up in Bangor just landed a scholarship to that art school, thanks to funds like the one Victoria left behind. "See there? Even the devil's own can plant a posy or two," Margaret'll cluck, her hazel eyes twinkling sly, and I'll nod, sipping my tea gone lukewarm, feeling the warmth spread anyway, from my chest out to my fingertips. Them walking gals we rustled up, widows and widowers with stories saltier than a pickled herring. They've turned into my tribe now, trundling along the rack line at dawn when the world's still hush and the clams are spittin' secrets from the sand. We'd link arms against the chill off the water, skirts hiked above the foam like we were gals again dodging waves at low tide, sharing snippets of our busted hulls over the crash of the surf. How one lost her captain to the bottle, another his bride to the wanderlust that pulled her west. "But look at us, Clara. Still afloat, ain't we? Bouncing on the swells like corks," old Widow Hargrove'd holler, her cane tapping time to the rhythm of the tide, and we'd laugh till our sides ached. The kind of belly laugh that chases the blue devils clean off the bluff. Daniel's wedding to Ellie was the cherry on top last summer. A simple shindig down on the beach with bare feet in the sand and wild asters tucked in her hair. No fancy veils or crimson interlopers, just vows swapped under a driftwood arch, while the seals barked approval from the rocks. I stood there in my linen best, pendant glintin' in the sun, watchin' my boy promise forever to a gal with eyes kind as a calm cove, and for the first time in dog years, the altar didn't pinch. It bloomed, like them daisies riotin' along my walk, turnin' sunward stubborn and sweet. Seabrooks changed a mite too. Folks not indifferent when I passed the post office or the bait shop. There's Clara, tough as a long liner in a blow, their whispers shiftin' from pity to pride, like they'd all caught a whiff of the grace waftin' off me now, subtle as jasmine on the wind but strong enough to steady a shaky hand. Looking back from this glider, with the stars punchin' holes in the twilight like lantern light through fog, and the crickets tunin' up their fiddle for the night, I reckon the real magic weren't in some silver screen windfall, or the villain gettin' her due on a platter of comeuppance. No, it was in the small salvos, the quiet mendin' that turned my scars from shackles to signposts, pointin' the way for gals like Ellie's niece or the young mama down at the cannery, scrapin' by with a babe on her hip and dreams deferred. Victoria's shade lingers gentle now, not as a squall, but a soft rain that watered the dry patches. Her confession the hoe that turned the soil for something green to grow. We even named that scholarship after her in the end, not the vixen, but the woman who owned her mess and mailed it forward, a plaque gleamin' on the hall wall. Victoria's turn, for those turning the page. Daniel reads from it in his classes now, over in that rainy English classroom with chalk dust flying like sea spray, teaching kids that history ain't just dates and defeats. It's the grit that hauls you through the wreck and the grace that glues the pieces pretty. And me? I keep the bookstore hummin', hostin' readin's where folks spill their guts over potluck pie, their voices minglin' with the harbor bells till the evenin's feel like a shindig worth crashin'. Margaret and I bake up storms in her kitchen, her counters flour-dusted as a baker's apron, churnin' out whoopie pies that could charm the stripes off a lighthouse cat, sharing 'em with the walkin' crew till we're all sticky-fingered and singin' off-key sea shanties. Life's a harbor bustlin' with comin's and goin's, ferries loadin' up dreams, sloops tacking against the wind, but with kin like Daniel hollerin' from afar, Margaret clompin' up the path, and even Victoria's quiet gift echoing in the scholarships. It's a voyage that sails smoother than I ever figured, full sail and steady helm. In the end, darlin', The bay's song is one of bouncin' back. A fiddle reel played slow and soulful with a kick in the step, reminding us that every low tide bears the mud, but every high one washes it clean, and every scar's a tale worth hollerin' round the supper table with a mug in hand. Family's that unbreakable hawser, hummin' through the hurt and the hail, tugging you back to the dance floor boots or no, heart heavy or light. And through the whole shebang, one truth rings out clearer'n a chapel bell on a windless morn. At any age, with a dollop of gumption and a heapin' helpin' of grace, we're never too old to dust off the salt, stand tall on the wharf, and two-step into the next swell, proving that the finest chapters are the ones we scribble with calloused paws and hearts wide as the horizon, long after the stingin' fades to a salty whisper on the breeze. If Clara's ramblin' tugged at your heartstrings like a fiddle in a foggy reel, holler down in the comments. What's the letter from your own back pages you'd pen or pluck open today? Bless your soul. Hit that like if it landed square, share it with a pal haulin' unseen anchors, and subscribe to Never Too Old for more down east yarns of us gals weavin' gold thread from the gray. Your tale might just be the next one we spin under these stars. Y'all mind the tide now, and keep risin'. See you round the bend, loves.